Morning, everybody. This morning we're going to work on something different. We're going to work on a So Powerful bag. These are made for girls in other countries who wouldn't be able to go to school without a bag to be able to carry their monthly supplies. So I'm going to put a link to sopowerful.org in our description box, but we're going to go ahead and make one of these today. I've already made one, and these go together fairly quickly and easily. I've got this one already ready to go, and we're going to make another one today so that I can send two off to this charity that does powerful things for young women throughout the world. Bags helps these girls be able to stay in school even during the time of the month where they normally wouldn't be able to. Because without a bag to carry their supplies in, they can't go to school. So let's just jump right into this. What I'm using for this bag is a fat quarter, and excuse me, the pattern onto the back of my interfacing, and I'm just going to use a pencil to do it. And I've made my interfacing big enough to go all the way out into the seams. These are fairly light fabrics, and I want this to be as sturdy as possible because I am assuming that this is going to get carried every month, possibly washed in between the hard way in a bucket or on rocks or something. So I want to make sure that it's going to last for the recipient. And I'm just using a pencil because it won't show through. And I'm going to sew with a fairly small stitch. And I'm going to backspace whenever I start a stitch. I'll backspace that in. I'm going to double check, make sure that I got all of my seams in there. And now I'm going to trim right around where I drew. There's a little bit of a curve at the bottom, so you want to make sure that you get a little closer so that your seams will turn out okay. I'm gonna go back down here to these curves. I'm just gonna put a little snip in there. so that when I turn this inside out, it's not going to have bulk in that seam. And now we're going to turn this flat piece right side out. Put my hand in there. Nice big piece to be able to turn, so that's not bad. Then I'm going to take my finger just along that seam to make sure that it's completely pushed out. Purple thing works for this. Anything that works for you to do it. Now this lighter side is the inside, and I want to make sure that when I do my seams, I kind of roll so that it goes to the inside. Then I'm going to put it over here on the iron and press it. The directions say to be sure to press this so that the lining seam is to the inside. What they're wanting you to do is make sure that your lining doesn't show on the outside. And there's a couple of things you can do. I'm just physically moving it so that it goes there. And then I'm putting my iron on top of it. Now the interfacing that I put in doesn't make it stiff, but it does give it a little more body. So that piece is now put together, and we're going to put a little edge stitch right around here. I'm going to try to do 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to do an 1/8 of an inch and put that edge stitching on. It'll look fantastic. And you just want to follow the edge of your bag. This both reinforces it and adds a little bit of decoration to it. Okay, so there's our top flap. The front pattern piece, which is E, it says to place it on a fold. And I want to get pretty pieces of the fabric to show, but I'm also working on this piece isn't going to be super visible. The only person who'll really see it is the person who's reaching down into the front pocket of the bag. I'm going to pin this piece on here. This is a beginner's bag, so we're going to use beginner techniques. Come on. Now you can cut this piece 2 different ways. You can do with scissors, or you can do with your rotary cutter. Since most people are probably going to use scissors, that's how I'm going to cut it. And I'm going to go right down here along this pattern piece. I've got it pinned down so nothing shifts around on us. And then I'm just going to go right along this edge. Okay. And then this needs 2 linings and 1 interfacing. So I'm going to take the pins out of this. The interfacing actually goes on the front fabric. So I'm going to bring my interfacing over here. I'm going to cut that. If you're not working off a bolt of interfacing, this won't be as big a deal, but since I have the bolt, we're going to go ahead and take that off of there. And go over here to our front piece. And I'm going to put that interfacing down on this fabric. My interfacing is a little bit off, so I will trim that and put that little piece in the garbage from this fabric. So we're going to lay our fabric out here. And I am going to... Okay, so now I've folded my fabric so that I have 2 layers of fabric with a fold over on this side. And I'm going to go ahead and put my pin in there. You notice I'm not cutting on the side where it says place on fold, but I am going to go ahead and cut over here on the other side. And then I am going to take the piece that has the interfacing on it and these 2 pieces, and I'm going to put a pin to hold them together so that I know what those pieces are. This is the purse body top of back, and I will show you where this piece goes. The name of this one just doesn't work for me. Excuse me. And what you're going to do here is you're going to cut out this little piece. This piece gets interfacing added to it. And I definitely want to interface this entire piece because this becomes a support feature of the bag. It goes underneath that flap at the back section, and it's where it holds the flap to the bag itself. All right, which side's up? This one's up. Use my iron to apply the interfacing. They put measurements on these pieces, so if you didn't want to use the pattern pieces, this one says that it's 2 inches by 9 inches right here. So you could just cut the piece. And this is a free pattern from So Powerful. So I'm not giving away measurements on anybody's purchased pattern. And just in case, because it is 4 years old, this pattern that I'm using is the 2018 revised edition. There may be a newer one. I don't know. Okay, so the next piece that we're going to do is the slip pocket and the purse body for the bottom of the back. And I have pinned my pattern piece on here, and I'm going to use my rotary cutter to pull these pattern pieces out. Rotary cutter and my ruler, because I don't want to pick this up and cut it with a pair of scissors. Works pretty quickly. And this could be done without the pattern piece completely, actually, because it's an 8 by 9 piece and the pattern tells you that. This becomes the slip pocket on the front of the bag. So you kind of want to pay attention to where your pieces of fabric are. And then it also becomes the bottom back of the purse. So I need one piece of interfacing to be able to do so I need one piece of interfacing the same size. This becomes the bottom of the bag at the back, plus it becomes the slip pocket across the front. So I'm going to need one piece of interfacing that is the same size that gets attached to one of these fabric pieces. And the way the pattern does this is it refers to the outer fabric as fabric, the inner fabric as lining, and then interfacing. So I've got the 2 slip pocket pieces down there, and the bottom of the back of the purse, which I'm going to put interfacing on. So let me get my interfacing up here and get a piece of that cut. You may notice that I'm kind of just rough cutting my interfacing. And then I'll match it up with my fabric. What do we want for the outside? Set that aside. Iron this interfacing onto this piece. And the beauty of using a light interfacing is that if you think that with the interfacing in the fabric, it's not sturdy enough, you can always add another little piece of iron on interfacing. So that's those pieces put together. Now I need the small slip pocket that goes on the inside of the bag. I've pretty much used up all of my fat quarter here. So I'm going to cut my slip pocket. It's 2 pieces from here. Okay, and then the last thing that I need to cut in order to do this is I need to cut 52 inches by 2 3/4 inches. And I'm going to cut here. Just to get myself a straight line. And I need 1 2 3/4 inches. That's for my strap. And I'm going to cut this little piece at 2 3/4 inches. My ruler is 2.5 inches. Pretty much have width of fabric on this piece. Let's double check myself. I have 35 inches there, and I need another 20 inches at 2 3/4. Oops, don't do that. I'm using up every possible scrap of this I can. If I need to join the pieces together to get what I need, I will. The beauty of iron-on interfacing is it'll reinforce my seams. So it's 24. So yes, I have plenty. And then I'm going to put my 2 pieces of strap together. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to fold that seam allowance down and edge stitch that as well. So let's do that real quick. Most fabrics are only 40 to 44 inches wide. So you're going to have to seam your strap pretty much no matter what you do. So what I've done, I joined my 2 pieces here, and then I sewed down the seam on the inside so that it would stay where I want it. So move all the scraps out of the way, and let's get some interfacing to do this with. Okay, so what I've done now is I've cut some interfacing. Okay, so I've cut a piece of interfacing that I'm going to use for this. I'm going to square up that edge real quick. The pattern says to match the width of the interfacing to the width of your strap. I'm going to go just a hair shy. Instead of doing 2 3/4, I'm going to do 2 1/2. Gives me a tiny bit less bulk. And I'm also not sewing the strap together and turning it out. I'm going to do it slightly easier. Let's go back to the ironing board. I'm going to bring the mat over here so that you can see what I am doing to this strap. Okay, so I've got my strap cut and I've got my interfacing cut. So I'm just going to iron the 2 together here. The interfacing is, of course, in little strips. I want to try to keep the interfacing as straight as possible. Here's my little join. Interfacing right over it. And the reason I sewed that down is for strength and to make sure it didn't flop up on me while I was doing this. But sewing that seam down also means that the strap will be stronger there rather than weaker, which it might have been. And I like I said, assume that these are going to be used for quite some time. And I'm not overlapping the ends of the interfacing, just matching them up. Then you can see right there, I've got a little hang off the end. I'm just going to turn that around, put it right there, so there's no gaps in the interfacing. Now the pattern calls for you to fold this in half with the interfacing out, sew down that seam and turn it. I'm not doing it that way. I'm going to fold it in half and iron all the way down. This is the simpler way to make straps. And I don't have lots of strength in my hand to be able to turn out long tubes like this. They do make tube turners, and I probably have one. It's not the best tool for me. And I'm using a Panasonic cordless iron with a ceramic plate, and it's still plenty hot to do this. Now what I'm going to do, I'm really trying to get you guys close. I'm going to take the outside edge and fold it into the center and fold it over. It makes the strap a little bit skinnier than the pattern calls for, but I think it also makes it stronger. And it's a well padded strap with all that interfacing in there. So notice I'm folding it in and then I'm just leaving my iron sit on it. It's not going to hurt my fabric. It's not going to hurt the interfacing. Now you can, if you like, put clips down here, but I haven't found that I need to do that with this particular way of making straps. But if it's going to take you a while to do it, go ahead. Put your clips on it. It'll hold it in place, make it a little easier for you. And I'm just literally folding it over right to the center on both sides. With the interfacing in there, it gives you a nice fold line. Again, fold it to the center, fold this side to the center, and then fold it over. And after you start doing this, it kind of wants to fold that way anyhow. And there's my join in my strap right there. I think you'd have to look for it to find it. If I were using a solid colored strap instead of this tie-dye, you probably wouldn't even see it. So let me get this all done and I will bring you back in just a couple of minutes. So now that we have pressed this strap, we're going to bring it over here to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew down the sides of the strap. Once again, you can do 1/4 of an inch or you can do 1/8 of an inch. We're going to sew down both sides of this to get this strap closed in. We're just folding over the edges and putting them together. This adds strength to the strap and keeps all those layers together. And more important than whether you do 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch is to keep it consistent so that it looks like. So if you start off with 1/4 inch, continue with 1/4 inch. Then I'm just going to turn it over and do it again from the other end. Okay, so now that we've got all of our pieces cut out and ready to go, I'm going to start here with my pocket. And I've made 2 marks on here that match the pattern piece. I need to put a 1/4 inch seam on here. And those marks tell me that I'm going to backspace there and leave an opening in between. I'm going to stitch this up. I'm going to go all the way around. I'm putting a 1/4 inch seam allowance in this. And even though the pattern doesn't tell me to, I have interfaced this piece. I want this pocket to be a little stronger. And I'm just going to clip the corners here before I turn this out. I'm leaving that little piece of interfacing in there. And I'm going to turn my little pocket out, pushing the corners out first. You may be able to do this faster. You may want to use a tool. Purple thing works great. A pencil, a chopstick, anything that you normally use for turning things. And the pattern calls for 2 separate pieces of fabric for this, one of the lining and one of the outside fabric. I was running a little low on lining, so I cut mine of the outside fabric. So that piece is done. And before I finish, before I go to sew the piece on this, I will iron it. And it doesn't get sewn shut until you actually put it on the bag, but it is going to have a little top edge stitch. So I make sure I pull that corner out completely. I use tweezers to do that. You can use a pen, like a straight pen. I just want to get my pocket or my corners of my pocket pulled out as well as possible. And this is the top of the pocket, and it just gets a little edge stitch. So we're going to do that right now. 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch, whatever looks good to you. Gives the top of the pocket some stability and makes it look a little better. So now that's all stitched. I'm going to set it aside. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do the big pocket for the outside, just here. That's pattern piece C. And we've got, trying to decide which side I like better, that I like better. This is the outside slip pocket. And this piece of fabric is what's going to show on the outside of your bag. Use a 1/4 inch seam, put the 2 pieces together. And then you're going to press that seam and match up these pieces. The pattern tells you to press this with the lining piece a little bit to the inside and finger pressing that where I want it. And then I'm going to edge stitch along that top edge. I'm using 1/8 of an inch here. Okay. And then the next step is to place the small slip pocket and 3/4 inches down the front of that body lining. I'm going to press it before I put it in there. While I'm waiting for the iron to get hot, I'm going to use my ruler here, and I'm going to line it up at 1 3/4 inches. Make sure that all of my pocket corners are turned out all the way. So I'll slide my little tweezers up in there. That's what I like to use, is my tweezers. And then use my tweezers right here to make sure that it's all up and out of there. We're going to line this pocket up at 1 3/4 inches, and we're going to center it. What I want is about 1 1/4 inches on either side, just to make sure that this stays right where I want it. I'm going to put a couple of pins in. Lots of ways you can do this. Pins, I don't use pin slots, but there are some applications where they just make things so much easier. And this is one of them, because I don't want to be guessing if I've got my pocket flat or if I'm sewing it properly. I'm going to edge stitch here, and I am going to back stitch. A good portion of this seam. You'll notice that it's also closing up the opening on the bottom of this pocket. Don't get overly fancy here. You don't need to put extra stitches in this pocket down the middle. This purse is specifically made for carrying things that make it easier for girls who are of menstruation age to carry their supplies. And those aren't necessarily small. They're mostly using homemade stuff. They're not getting tiny little things like might be available in the US. Now, we want to make sure that we have our pocket up. And we're going to move that aside. Purse pattern piece E. This is purse pattern piece E. Make sure I've got it turned right side up, because it is literally 9.5 by 9. And then we have the pocket, the slip pocket that goes on the front. We're going to do a quick iron on that, just to make sure there's no wrinkles. And these are going to get basted together. Did I turn it wrong despite all my best intentions? No, I didn't. Okay. Again, I'm going to bring my ruler over here, and I'm going to measure down 1 3/4 inches from the top of my pocket, and or from the top of my front pattern piece, and I am going to pin this pocket into place as well. Okay, so I'm going to go 1.75 inches down from the top to put this pocket piece on. I'm going to make sure that everything is lined up and centered. Putting in a couple of pins. Not doing lots of pinning. Just enough to keep it in place. And now I'm going to base stitch this pocket on. So I need to be as close to the edge as I can get. So quick little seam. This just holds the pocket in place while you put everything together. If you don't sew out here in the 1/8 seam allowance, then you may have to pull these stitches out because they'll show. Get as close to the edge as you possibly can. This makes it easier for you. I'll take these pins out. And you can see on the back, I've gotten extremely close to the edges of that fabric. So here's our front pocket piece. And we're going to set it aside. First body, bottom of back, that's here. Putting my pattern piece on to make sure everything matches. And then we have the purse body, top of back. That's got interfacing on it. And then here comes our flap. Now, this piece, the easiest way to do this is to fold this in half, make a little tiny snip up here at the top. Just 1/8 of an inch, it doesn't have to be big. And then the same on the flap, fold it in half, little tiny snip. And you want to put right sides together with the flap and the back. And the top of your back, which is this little strip, pattern piece G. Whoops. And the top of the back, pattern piece G, you're going to put a little tiny snip. They tell you just fold it in half, blah, blah, blah. I'm just doing it how I feel works for me. And then once again, this is a great place for clips. I'm going to use pins because I have the pins out and they're super close. And I'm pinning through all of the layers, through the front, the back, the interfacing, the flap. I want everything to be pinned down so it doesn't move. We are going to take a 1/4 inch seam right across through there. Don't get skimpy on this one. You need that 1/4 inch seam. And I've backstitched, excuse me, at both edges. And then the directions tell you to open this up and you're going to press the seam towards the bottom of the back. So I'm going to do that and I will be right back. Once you press that seam, then they want you to edge stitch right along here where the flap goes into the seam. What you're doing is you're reinforcing that flap. I'm going to back stitch, then I'm going to edge stitch. Make sure that your flap and your back and everything stays together. You have a nice, neat little seam right there where your flap joints, and everything is put together very well. This is what it looks like when it's laid down. So you have that nice flap that opens there, and that flap is secured. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and edge stitch this seam as well. It's not necessary, but you could if you wanted to. And if I were going to do it, I would edge stitch it a 1/4 inch away right here. I would do it from this side. Okay, so now that we have the purse back together, I have to go to the next page of instructions. And the purse, excuse me. So now I've got the purse back and the purse front. I'm going to put them together. I'm lining up the top of my purse so the sides all match. Pins, just to make sure that everything stays where I want it. And I don't want the flap down inside because I don't want it to accidentally get caught in one of the seams. And here we are, all pinned. 1/4 inch seam, and we are going to back stitch at the beginning and the end. My goal is to make this as strong and sturdy as possible. Okay, I'm going to take my pins out. And I'm going to double check that I got all my seams and all my pocket, that everything is caught in the seam. And I have. So then the next step is we're going to bring the pattern piece back in here. The pattern piece shows that you need to basically box these corners. So I'm going to use my pencil to mark where these corners need to be boxed at. A straight line, straight line. The same over here. It's going to come right down from there. right over from there. This looks complicated, but it really isn't. What you're going to do is you're going to clip out that corner there all the way across that line. And there's a lot of layers there, so you may have to put a little pressure to be able to cut it. Cut out your corners. And then what they want you to do is take, this is easier for me, do it from inside. So I want to make sure that I go down in there and I make those two seams meet. Okay. And I'm going to turn them opposite directions. And now that I've got it flat, there's no wrinkles, I'm going to put a pin in there. But before you sew, let's go over here to the other end and let's do that again. Let's make those two seams meet. And one thing I want to make sure of while I'm doing this is that, see the seam along the bottom? I want to make sure that it folds the same direction on both ends because that will help keep there from being bulk. So when I match up my seams, I'm going to make sure that this bottom seam turns the same direction on both ends. I've got it matched, and I'm going to put a pin. A lot of layers, so it may take a moment to get the pin through. Okay? And then you're going to bring over to your sewing machine, right here, 1/4 inch seam. And this one, you want to stitch back and forth a couple of times. This is the bottom, basically the strength of your bag. So go over it a couple times. You want to make sure this stays closed. I went slow because I knew I had a pin in there, but now it's closed on both sides. And then I'm going to do this one. I can sew from either side, but 1/4 inch, back and forth. And out. Probably overkill, but it is closed completely. Now, if you turn your bag out here, you will see what boxing those corners just did for you. It turned it from basically a sack into a bag with some width inside it to hold things. And now you have pretty little corners. Okay. So there's that part. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our strap. Got a little piece of thread there. And while making sure that our strap doesn't have a twist in it, we're going to pin it to this side seam. And the instructions say, make sure there's about 1.5 inches sticking up above your seam. So we're going to pin this right here. And I'm centering it on that side seam. And then the way I do this is I lay the bag down face up, and I'm going to bring my strap down, making sure that it doesn't twist. And then I'm going to center the strap on the side seam on the other side, right here, leaving about 1.5 inches sticking up, and pin it in place. Then I'm going to baste it onto the bag. You know you're going to sew about 1.5 inches, about a 1/4 inch seam. So I want to make sure that my basting is inside that area. But I also want to make sure that it goes back and forth and will hold. So I've now basted that in to my seam. Ouch. Don't stick yourself with pins like I'm doing. And then I'm going to baste it on this side. And I'm not doing, tons of anything. I'm just basting it. I'm going to make sure that stitch is going to be enclosed whenever I do my bag. So now we have the outside of the bag, and this can be set aside for just a minute. Now we're going to work on the inside of the bag. So here's our slip pocket, our lining piece with our slip pocket on it. Slip pocket is facing up. Here's the other lining piece, and I'm going to match them up. Let's make sure I do them properly. Turn it. And I want to give that a quick press just to make sure everything's going to lay down where I want. Okay, so now that we have our 2 lining pieces, this requires that we leave about a 4-inch opening in the bottom. So I'm going to leave myself an opening at the bottom. And I'm not going to put pins on this one, but I am going to backspace. At the beginning and at the end of each seam. I want to reinforce that stitching because I'm going to turn the whole bag through it. So I want to make sure that's not going to come apart. And I'm reinforcing that edge up there. Then we're going to do the same thing as we did before. We're going to take, again, I'm going to double check before I do this next step that my slip pocket is up. So I don't want it to be down. Then I'm going to take my pattern piece again and my pencil, and I'm going to mark where these corners go. Use my pencil to draw my line in. Cut the corners out. We're going to cut the corners right here. on both sides. Then we're going to do the corners the same way that we did before. We're going to match up the two side seams right here so that they are matching in the center, and I've got them nested. All us quilters know that term, right? We're going to do it at the other end. Open up your little triangle. And I'm going to make sure again that my seams are nested and that the bottom seam on the bag is running the same direction. Just makes it less bulky. Put a pin in there. You could hold this with your fingers or with a clip, but since I want to make sure that this bag is strong, I'm putting a pin in. Then I'm going to sew back and forth again, just like I did before. Just to make sure that that is strong, that it's not going to come apart. I don't want the person who uses my bag to have a bag that comes apart on it in no time. Okay, so we have the lining or the inside of the bag ready to go, and we have the outside of the bag ready to go. Now, in order to put this bag together, we're going to do this. I'm going to take the strap and I'm going to reach up through this bottom, grab the strap, and start pulling the strap through. And we're putting the outside of the bag inside the lining portion of the bag, including the flap and the strap. And now that I've got it started, the reason you leave a 4-inch hole is so you have plenty of room to reach through. But you're going to pull or push the outside of the bag into the inside of the bag, just like this. And the goal here is to match up the center seam of the bag with the center seam of the lining. And I am going to put a pin there to hold that one seam in place. Pin's taking a little hand strength there today. And then I'm going to flip around, and I'm not leaving the edge of the bag folded at all. I'm trying to make them straight so they match. But having that handle going through there helps a little bit. And the handle shouldn't be scrunched up inside your seam line, anything like that. Everything wants to be flat. And again, matching your seams up. Now, when you get over here, you want to make sure that your flap is pushed all the way down in there and that your flap is on the same side of the bag as the slip pocket. That's the way the purse is designed. And here you can pen or not pen. If you're fairly confident with your ability to keep things in place, you could leave the pens out. I'm going to go ahead and pen because 1, this is a beginner bag, and 2, I'm teaching beginner sewers. So I want to make sure that you have the tools you need to make this work for you. And I'm making sure that my edges match all the way around. Bring it up, show it here. And put your pins in so that you can see that it all matches. Now, if you have a free arm sewing machine, this is a perfect place to take off the table. I'm not going to take my table off because my Juki is mounted down inside a table. But what I am going to do is I'm going to sew from the inside, and I'm going to sew with a fairly small stitch. I'm going to do a 2, and I'm going to go all the way around the inside of this bag, including right here, and I'm going to back stitch over those straps. But I'm going to start like not on the strap. I'm going to start a little past it. And I'm going to stitch here. I'm going to give myself a couple of back stitches. Nothing major. And as I go, I'm feeling to make sure that everything is still lined up. When you get close to where the handles are, the straps, you can kind of manipulate the bag so that it all lays like this. I back stitched over it. And then I'm gonna flip my bag around. Not in a hurry to do this. This doesn't require speed. It just requires that you pay attention to what you're doing. Because you want a good result out of this. I mean, if you're going to make it, especially to send it to a charity, I like to make sure that what I'm sending represents me. You know, even if it is going to go halfway around the world and nobody's going to know who it came from. I don't want someone to feel like they're getting less than a nice product just because I'm making it for charity. I think most people feel that way. Now that I've sewed all the way around it, I'm going to pull my pins out. Don't tell the police on me that I sewed with pins in my bag. Oh no. I'm a terrible person. All right. Now, this is all sewed together. Double check, make sure that your seams are all put together. And then this opening at the bottom of our lining is going to be our buddy. Because now I'm going to reach up in here and I'm going to start pulling my bag out. That's the reason that I made sure I sewed I back stitched well at the end of those seams. And I'm not pulling hard, I'm just pulling gently. We are going to sew up that bottom seam, but it's so much easier if you don't have to try to sew up through the corners and stuff. And I'm pushing out my little corners at the bottom of the lining. So that they're out. You've still got that hole. You can reach down here and push out your corners here if you need to. And I want to double check before I go any further that I did turn my bag out right, because I want this slip pocket to show on the front. And the first time I turned it out, I had the slip pocket pulled over here. So I want to make sure that everything is where I want it. And now we have a seam right here that needs to be sewn. And I'm just folding it in, making sure those raw edges are completely enclosed. And I'm going to sew here, and I'm going to backstitch. I don't want anything to go down inside the lining of the bag. I have a little thread that I need to stitch down here. And then I'm going to turn my lining to the inside. Now I'm going to take my iron. I do it with my fingers. What I'm doing here is I'm rolling the edge of the bag so that the lining is on the inside. And I'm using my fingers to press it down. Hard spot to get an iron into here. Using a pen just to make sure it stays where it's supposed to. Especially making sure that it stays down right here by the straps. And you're actually going through 2 layers of strap and 2 layers of the outside and the inside. Go ahead, I can edit it out. Okay, so now I've gone and I've pushed so that the lining stays down to the inside. Now I'm just going to top stitch along the lining. I'm doing this from the outside of the bag so that I can see it. Again, slow, careful. You don't have to do anything crazy to do this. Just make sure you don't get the other seams in here. The other side of the bag. This looks more difficult than it is. It really does. Keep your straps flat. and just keep turning until you come back to where you started. And it's a tiny bag, so you can do anything for, what, 10 or 15 inches. I'm going to take my little bags out of here, or my pens, I mean. And then one last little thing to do. Right here along your straps, I'm going to go in and I'm going to sew a square for mine just to make the straps even more sturdy. It's a couple layers there. Remember, we've got 1.5 inches, so the strap comes down to almost here. I just want to put a little box right here so that my strap is as strong as I can possibly make it. And lay everything out flat. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. You could draw this out or measure it if you want to. I'm not that person. Okay. Now our bag is done. I need to go through and trim out. Yeah.